Welcome, revolutionary mama, to the Raising Wild Hearts podcast. I'm Ryan Watkin, educator, mom of three, rebel at heart, and passionate soul on a mission to empower and inspire you. Here, we'll explore psychology, spirituality, parenthood, and the intersection where they all come together. We'll discover how challenges can be fertile soil for growth, and that even in the messy middle of motherhood, we can find magic in the mundane. Join me on my own personal journey as I talk to experts and share resources on education, creativity, self-care, family culture, and more. I believe we can change the world by starting at home in our own minds and hearts, and that when we do, we'll be passing down the most important legacy there is: healing. And so it is. Welcome back to another amazing episode of the Raising Wild Hearts podcast. I'm so glad you're here, my loves. And I'm so glad I'm here because finally I have a parent coach on the pod. Yay. I really believe that we as parents, and really in general, we have the power within ourselves. We have the intuition to know what needs to be done. And I also think that we do need a little support. So we need to follow the breadcrumbs. And sometimes we need help from an outside person to just give us a structure, an idea, something that maybe didn't click. We do have blind spots. It's really important that we seek outside help when we need it. If things are getting too overwhelming and we're just struggling too much, then we can ask for help. So I'm really glad to chat it up with my guest today, Laura Reardon. And Laura has a background in psychology. She has a lot of different things. She's got certifications from the Gottman Institute. She's completed the anxiety coach training with the Institute of Childhood Psychology, and she is a certified parent coach. She's got 2 kids of her own who were deeply feeling, and so she's learned quite a bit over the years. So I'm really, really excited to welcome you to the pod, Laura.
I'm really excited to be here. Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. I just have to kick it off with I know your kids are older. How old are they?
My daughter is 18, and I want to say a freshman in college because that's what I've been saying all year, but the year has just come to an end. So I guess she's a rising sophomore. And my oldest just graduated from college and is off on his first apartment and his first job and all of that good stuff. So wow. Yes, I am on the other end of raising my children.
You are. My kids are littles. They're 8, 6, and 1. And so I have to ask, is there this feeling of I did it? Do you have that at all? Okay, I did it. Or does that happen?
That's such a good question. My instinct, so I won't overthink it. I'll just say what's coming into my brain, which is I'm doing it. Believe it or not. At these ages, you still feel like you're doing it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But that's just all I can say is it feels like you're doing it. Now, yeah. I will say for my oldest, now he's 22. So I will say I'm starting to have feelings of I've done it with him. But yeah. I will tell you, right into those college years, there's still lots and lots of mothering to be done. The interesting thing too, beyond this, and this is my new learning curve, is, transitioning your relationship with your older child. And that's another challenge in mothering, because of course our relationships with our children, we hope will continue for all of our lives. And so, it's just, there's always a new thing, always a new challenge.
Sure. Yeah. I'm always trying to envision what that will look and feel like, because right now the physicality and just the pure presence of motherhood is one of the biggest things. I mean, just the day-to-day kind of chop wood, carry water, just being there. And I imagine as they grow older, it gets, it evolves and it changes for sure. So can I paint you a picture of something that happened this morning? I think this is just a great way to kick us off, because you talk a lot about anxiety. You talk a lot about big feelings, highly feeling kids. And so this morning, my older 2, my 6 and 8-year-old, are doing a trial at a new school, and they were feeling very nervous. And there's been a lot of lead up to it. We've known it was coming for 2 weeks. It's been on the calendar where they can see it. And so they woke up and it was like, today's the day. And they were a little excited and a little nervous. And they get dressed in their uniform. They have to wear a uniform. And so everything's like going very smoothly. And we eat breakfast and we talk about like, oh, you're feeling a little nervous and you're also excited. Okay, what are you going to do to make today great? And then at one point, my older one kind of bumped her head and she got really sad. And I saw her run off. She went into her room and she comes out in regular clothes. She has her uniform off and she says, and I'm not going. And like, okay, so I look at the clock and I'm like, okay, we've got 20 minutes till we need to leave. So I'm going to myself, don't freak out. Don't freak out. It's fine. So I first addressed, you bumped your head. Ooh, that really, really hurt, right? Gosh, you're feeling really sad. So I didn't even go into like, yes, you are going, go get your uniform back on. Cause I knew by experience that wasn't going to be the way. So eventually we repaired, we connected. She went and put her uniform back on and she was still a little nervous. And to wrap up the story with a nice little bow on the way, they were both very nervous and they were saying, well, like, what if this, or what if we don't know anybody? What if nobody's nice? What if, they're talking about these things? And instead of, I'm a little nervous too, as their mom, I'm like going like, I'm nervous for you too. But so what I did is I said, you're nervous and yeah, that might happen. And what will you do if that happens? And what are you going to do to make today great? That was the thing. And then we took some deep breaths and then I, dropped them off and they flew their little wings and they said goodbye, even though they were feeling nervous. So what would you guide a parent to do in a similar situation as this? I'm sure it's kind of a run-of-the-mill situation for people, in different contexts, but how did that go well? What could I have done better? What would you add?
Well, I guess I'll start by asking you, is there anything that you would have wanted to go better?
This morning.
Mm-hmm.
I think it went about as well as it could have. I mean, I think this is a pretty good example. I could give another example of like, where I messed up. I can't think of one off the top of my head, but I think it went pretty as well as it could have. I would have probably been a little more relaxed. My husband's out of town, so I'm just, a little more on edge and I feel that in me. So I think what could have gone better is me just being even calmer. So just even more relaxed, but I think it went fairly well, really.
Okay, then I will start by saying the one thing I think you could add, and then let's review and talk about all the things that went well, because boy, I wish all of us as parents, I wish I as a parent back when my kids were that age had all of those skills. And I didn't, and
Right.
so many of us are still learning. And so the one thing I would add the one thing I would say that you could add in was self-compassion, because it sounds to me like the only thing that you wish that could have gone better is that you were not a human being and were not experiencing real life. Right. So to me, I would just say, I would give yourself a little pat on the back and a whole lot of like, wow, I did the very best I am capable of doing. And I can feel really good about that.
Yeah.
And you know what, even if you had, lost it and yelled and any number of things, I would actually be saying the same thing, because we all have those moments as a parent where we feel, I'm pretty darn good at this, aren't I?
Yeah.
And then we have those moments where we think, oh, geez,
really messed that up.
Yeah. Really didn't get that right. I really wish I could redo that. And so again, we're all human beings and we're all always doing the best we can. And that's always enough. And so I would say that, but all the things that I noticed that you did well, and I'll just kind of tick through them quickly and then we can expand on anything you're interested in. But I would always start with you as the mom, and I'm hearing you say things that give me the indication that you have an awareness that your inner sense of calm and well-being play a really important role in your ability to be there for your kids in ways that support them and set them up for success. I would start by giving my definition of emotional regulation, because that's my focus. I work with parents. I help them learn how to respond to the big emotions and big behaviors in their home in a way that creates calm, connection, and a focus on conflict resolution. And this is all to support the development of emotional regulation. And emotional regulation, as I define it, is essentially the ability to be with our emotions, the comfortable ones and the uncomfortable ones, and to be able to do just that, to respond in ways that create calm, connection, and a focus on conflict resolution. And the reason that that is so challenging is because of how our nervous system unconsciously impacts our behavior. And our nervous system, in very simple terms, is essentially a communication between our brain and our body, and it affects everything that we do. And so when we're feeling comfortable emotions, we are emotionally regulated, again, meaning we're able to be calm, and we're able to connect, and we're able to focus on resolving problems. But when we experience uncomfortable emotions, which we often do in life, in particular in our life as a parent, it can trigger a sense of threat in our nervous system, which can activate our fight, flight, or freeze response. And so instead of acting in emotionally regulated ways, we act in emotionally dysregulated ways where, we are defensive and our focus is on survival, because as important as our fight, flight, or freeze response is in our survival, of course, back in the days of our ancestors when physical threats were much more significant, it's what kept us alive. Today, more often, our fight, flight, or freeze response gets triggered when we experience big emotions related to everyday life rather than related to a life-threatening experience. And unfortunately, our nervous system is not able to distinguish between the two. And so for those reasons, and I will add two more reasons, also because as adults, as parents, many of us were not taught how to manage our emotions and our behaviors. And so although our brain is fully developed with the capacity to do that, we just weren't taught the skills. And for our children, their brain has not developed yet, in many cases, the capacity to manage their emotions and their behavior effectively. It essentially, resides in our prefrontal cortex, which is fully developed until age 25. That said, the newest thinking, and I'm reading a book by Mona Delahook called Brain Body Parenting, where she really explores this deeply. The newest thinking actually kind of pushes against what we've been taught and teaching for a long time, which is that it's all based on our prefrontal cortex. And the newest understanding is more rooted in acknowledging that actually some of our kids, emotional regulation seems to come pretty easily for them long before their prefrontal cortex is fully developed. And so now the newest thinking is more about recognizing individual differences. And so, for example, our kids with a diagnosis such as ADHD or autism, or for our kids who are deeply feeling kids, or for our kids with sensory sensitivities and other individual differences, learning emotional regulation can just be more challenging and take more time. So that's something that the field of neuroscience is still figuring out. But all that to say, regardless, bottom line is, for our kids, for some of them, emotional regulation is just going to be more challenging and take more time. So all that to say, when we have that foundation of understanding, we can understand why our self-care is so important. Because when we're not getting enough sleep, as we often don't as parents, especially of young children or teenagers who are out with their new license, or out with their friends who have their new license, or just generally coming home later than we want to go to bed, or when we're not getting proper nutrition or enough hydration or enough movement or connection or downtime, all of these things, they create uncomfortable feelings in us. For example, maybe they create the uncomfortable feeling of overwhelm. And so again, when I talk about the first thing that I see that you're doing really well is you're acknowledging your self-care and the role in staying emotionally regulated.
So I have definitely a tendency to go to overwhelm. I think so many of us here do, because we are in such a sympathetic state. And something as simple as like, put your shoes out and get out the door, it like feels like a saber-toothed tiger attacking us. Like, right. So we're in this like really rushed, hurried place typically. So one of the things I've learned after years of really botching it, and still sometimes too, is that is the priority for me to be calm. That's over anything, because I understand that co-regulation, me plus somebody, my kids, mostly, we are either calm together or we could go, into the tornado together. Like, they feed off what the parent is feeling. Like my husband and I talk about all the time, we're the leaders of the house. We set the tone. And if we're off, everything's just going to be a teeny bit more off. And our kids feel that too. I'm very curious if you have to coach parents at all with being able to be present with the comfortable or great emotions like excitement, joy, some of those things that could be, I guess, for a lack of a better word, quote unquote, annoying. Like if we're trying to work and our kids like bouncing up and down because they're so excited about something or a book or a story or, a game that they're playing. Do you ever have to coach parents on that? Because we talk a lot about the uncomfortable ones. We talk a lot about the anxiety or the tantrums, but what about the good ones?
Well, I think what happens with, any emotion that is reactive, overly reactive, can be triggering. And so I would also add that in that case, it may be a, quote, positive emotion for the child, but the problem is it's triggering the uncomfortable emotion for the adult. So it's probably still rooted in uncomfortable emotions. And typically in our culture, it's the uncomfortable emotions that are triggering, because for many of us, we were raised in homes in which uncomfortable emotions were either ignored or minimized or punished. And what was considered acceptable emotions were the positive ones. And so we learned to create a feeling of safety around the positive emotions, but we learned, if we were raised in homes like that, we learned to associate fear and danger with uncomfortable emotions. And so when you talk about co-regulation, and we can relate this, heading back to the example that we started with, because that's another thing that you did a beautiful job of. First of all, we can start with a definition, a basic understanding of what co-regulation is. And my definition of co-regulation is recognizing our kids' misbehavior as dysregulation as compared to purposeful behavior that they are in control of and are acting that way to get their way. Not to say that doesn't happen. For example, if you're a parent who, when your child asks for that candy bar and you say no, and then they keep escalating, and ultimately you say yes, then yes, we're teaching reactivity. And that is creating an environment in which we are supporting and encouraging reactive behavior. But in most cases, what's happening for our kids when they lose it is the same thing that's happening for us when we lose it. I mean, we would never describe our behavior as purposeful or even misbehavior. We would describe it as we lost it, and it's the same for our kids. So for example, this morning with your daughter, for some people, it might have been a reaction to go straight to ignoring, dismissing, or punishing those big emotions. And instead, what happened is you recognized their emotions as dysregulation, that they were feeling a big emotion and they were not able to act as their best selves. They were not able to feel calm, connect, and to focus on resolving problems. And so in offering co-regulation, you were able to create that safety around those uncomfortable emotions for your child.
So I let her feel what she was feeling. And so she's sensing from me, because I'm letting her feel it, that it's okay to feel that, right?
That's exactly right, because
Okay.
you're not telling her to go away until she can be calm.
Right.
You're not saying, "Oh, you're fine."
Right.
You're not completely ignoring her and just saying, "Go get your shoes on," or I should say, "Go get dressed again."
Uh-huh.
You're acknowledging who she is. She's feeling seen and heard and understood. I'm not a bad kid. I'm a kid who's experiencing big emotions right now.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, I'm not able to act as my best self right now. And so the first thing that you're doing is you're creating that sense of safety with emotions, so that over time and with repetition, you are supporting her to grow up to be an adult who feels, instead of being reactive to uncomfortable emotions, somebody who can feel calm and feel uncomfortable emotions. And so when we create that safety around uncomfortable emotions, we're really supporting that. And also what's happening is you're helping her in the moment to return to regulation, because when we feel safe, we can return to regulation. And so co-regulation is essentially that. It's recognizing dysregulation and responding in ways that help our child return to regulation. So in helping her feel safe, she was able to return to that regulated state. And I'm not sure exactly what happened between that and getting dressed, but I mean, that to me is what had to have happened. If she went from taking off her uniform and saying, "I'm not going to school," and then she's dressed and ready to go to school, she returned to regulation in which she was able to act as her best self.
Yes.
And sometimes what we can do in those moments, once they return to regulation, is introduce that conflict resolution. I don't know if this had to happen or not, but an example of what someone could do in this situation, if it was needed, it could be that just in returning to regulation, she's like, "All right, I'm going to get dressed. I'm ready to try again." Or it could be that we would say to our child, "Okay, I get it. This is really hard. It makes sense that it's really hard. So what's a plan? What's a plan for how you can go to school in a way that feels manageable?" And that's when we can start brainstorming. And, again, depending on the individual situation and the individual child, that can look a lot of different ways. But when we respond in that way, and when we involve our child in the problem solving, it does, again, lots of wonderful things. It creates cooperation, because when we are part of the solution, we're much more likely to implement the solution. It's also going to be more effective, because if we think we know what's going to make her feel safe enough to go to school, that's just our guess. We better to ask her. Also, we develop problem solving skills. We develop confidence. And so when we can start by helping our child return to a regulated state and then move to problem solving, we are wiring their brain for emotional regulation. So essentially, what creates self-regulation is co-regulation, because it wires our brain to go from dysregulated to regulated over and over again. Then our brain wires so that one day we can do that on our own.
Hey, it's me, Ryan. So something I do every single day to invest in my growth, besides connecting with the humans on this podcast, obviously, is reading. Reading is where it all started for me. I was 5 when I became obsessed with books, writing them, reading them, collecting them. I love how I can get inspired with new ideas and stories and ways to grow. That's why I ask all my guests what they're reading. And finally, you can check out all the book recommendations from the experts and authors on the show in one place at raisingwildhearts.com/books. There are some life changers in there like You Are the Placebo, and a few hidden gems like Sacred Motherhood and Living, Loving, and Learning. So if you want to get your hands on your next great read, check out the full list by heading to raisingwildhearts.com/books. Okay, back to the show. Right. So we have multiple times in a day to help our children like fire and wire these neurons. for lifelong conflict resolution, being able to have healthy coping strategies, and really to just regulate themselves in stressful environments. I mean, our world is not getting any less stressful. Like, I think by the time our kids are older, your kids are older, but the little kids now are older, like it may just be more stressful. So I think this is lifelong skills that we're teaching them. I mean, I could have used conflict resolution as a child. I had an incident with a friend couple weeks ago, and I'm like, gosh, I handled that like not a very calm or logical person. I mean, it was like I was 10 again on the playground going like, well, you said this, like, and I'm like, who am I? So I think that these are the foundations for our children forever. Would you tell us what is anxiety?
Anxious feelings are a feeling of feeling unsafe or feeling in danger. And that's no different than a feeling, any other feeling, anger, sadness, happiness. We always want to start by creating a sense of normalcy around feeling anxious. There's nothing good or bad about feeling anxious. It's, again, part of the human experience of having emotions. And like all of our emotions, they communicate information to us about our needs. That's what emotions do. And that's why we don't want to drown our emotions out, because they communicate important information to us if we respond to them in ways where we are able to take on, the capacity of, feeling curious. Okay, I'm feeling anxious. I wonder, what's happening right now? What do I need right now? And so it's a very healthy emotion that we want to feel comfortable with. Now, when we get stuck in any feeling, that is where it can become problematic. And that's where it can interfere with, the things that we want to do. And so it's really important to distinguish the difference there.
Mm-hmm. I like that you mentioned the word stuck. This is a word that we use in our house a lot. Mm-hmm. I have a tendency to get stuck in like a frustration, like that kind of a thing. And then my children have different tendencies, but one of them has a tendency to get stuck in anxiety, which then ends up being presented as anger or aggression. And one of the things I learned was to so I got curious and I started to see the cues before she would get really, really stuck. So I would really start to look at the patterns. When is this happening? Is she hungry, thirsty, tired? Does she have to go to the bathroom? Like, what's physically happening with her? And then what's like the backstory? What happened with her and her siblings? What's happening with us? My husband and I, what's going on in the house? So I got curious to try and notice and track, when is this happening? Even still, every once in a while, she'll get stuck. What's the best thing to do when one of us, either a parent or a child, is stuck in an emotion?
Well, I'll start by talking about what we can do as a parent when our child is stuck in an anxious feeling. And I would say no different than when they're stuck in any other feeling, co-regulation. So just as when she was stuck in, let's say, overwhelm, you responded by creating safety around that emotion, and she was then able to move out of that emotion. It's the same thing with anxiety. But what happens is when our kid feels anxious as a parent, and I have lived experience with this, there's essentially nothing more terrifying for us than when our child feels anxious. It's more terrifying than our own selves feeling anxious.
Wow.
Because at least for me, I felt powerless. I had no idea how to help my kid. I still actually have a vivid memory of one of my kids we thought perhaps having an asthma attack, and we really didn't know what was happening. So I took them to the pediatrician. And so their first attempt was, of course, to take a look at all the physical things and what's happening. And then she paused and she opened a window, and all of a sudden they felt better. And she looked at me with a big, huge smile on her face and took a breath and said, "Oh, it's anxiety. Like this was the best news in the world. And I'm thinking, oh my God, that's the worst news in the world.
Right.
I would rather of course, nothing serious, but like something that you can make better. To me, it was terrifying.
Yeah.
I didn't know what to do. My first, I'm not proud of this, but I also have compassion for myself. I was doing my best, that I know for sure. My first thought was to ignore it. I thought, oh, if I just pretend it's not happening, it won't be happening. Of course, I was in my own freeze response. To come full circle, what I've learned to do is to acknowledge their anxious feelings with acceptance. In other words, same thing with any emotion, like let's say anger, when we ignore, punish, minimize, we create fear around it. And so it increases their reactivity. Well, it's the same with anxious feelings. If we respond in a way that communicates to our kid, oh my God, I can't handle your feelings. I don't think you can handle your feelings. We're essentially escalating their fear. And then they start to feel anxious about feeling anxious, because that feeling is I'm getting the message, this is a very unsafe feeling. And I'm already feeling unsafe. So it becomes this vicious cycle of feeling anxious and then feeling anxious about feeling anxious. So as a parent, when we can respond again in a similar way to you that you did this morning, by just acknowledging, oh, you're feeling really anxious. I can see that by looking at you. And, that's, and again, it's so individual what helps each child feel safe. For some of our kids, it's an embrace, it's being close. For some of our kids, it's giving them a little space to work it out in a way that communicates the message, I am here for you, but I'm here for you in a way that acknowledges you need a little bit of space. So it's, again, it's very different than ignoring. For some of our kids, we learn what helps them feel safe. It could be movement. It could be a calming activity. So it's about getting to know our individual kid, but it's all rooted in a foundation of creating acceptance and safety around feeling anxious.
I don't know that in prior generations, it was so common, or was it just ignored so much? It was, you went to your room, and because, the parents weren't modeled how to deal with it. So why do you think it's becoming more common?
I think that I don't know the answer to that. I think you acknowledge both points beautifully. Is it that it's more common, or is it that we now have an awareness? And like when you have an awareness of anything, you see it more. I still have another vivid memory of when we were in family counseling, and I had ended up having an individual appointment with the therapist, and I don't remember any of the backstory to how we arrived at this particular observation, but I remember saying something to the therapist like, oh yeah, I'm not an anxious person. I've just never struggled with anxiety. And he looked at me and said something like, oh, that's not how I experienced you. I was at the ripe old age of, I don't know, probably maybe in my young 40s. I don't really remember. I had no awareness that I was an anxious person. Now I have an awareness. I am an anxious person. I did not know. So there's that. But also, certainly, I will comment on the pandemic. And that was, that's not to be minimized in terms of a moment in history and the impact that it had. Regardless of the age of the child, there were different ways in which it impacted them. But the message that we all received is that the world is not safe. That is just plain old makes sense, that it would escalate our anxious, it would elevate our anxiety, because we were hearing messages from everywhere that the world is not safe. And so in particular for our kids who don't have the fully developed brain or the life experience, to have a little bit more perspective. I mean, we know as adults how overwhelming it felt for us. So we can only imagine in the brains of our children and their lack of life experience, how that must have been even more overwhelming.
So I think this is a good part to talk about your ABCs of calm. So you already mentioned the A, which is awareness. So after awareness, then what?
Yes. So this is a tool that I created to help parents feel calm in the moment when they're feeling triggered. So it's not the work that we can do outside of the moment in terms of setting us up for success. It's not the reflective work that we can do after we've lost it. It's that in the moment tool. And so A is for awareness. We can work on building our awareness of when we're feeling triggered, when we're feeling big emotions, when we feel like we're going to lose it. And then we can, once we have that awareness, we can go to B, which is breathe. We can take that deep breath in, letting our exhale be longer than our inhale. And when we do that, it's a tool for helping us be with our emotions without lashing out or shutting down, without going into the fight, flight, or freeze response. And for some of us, breath work is very effective. I know for me it is, but I also know for others that it's not effective. And so we can consider B as symbolic for whatever helps you be with your emotions without lashing out or shutting down. Now, again, it's a little tricky because it's that in the moment tool. So we want to identify something we can do in the moment. We can't go to the gym. We can't, necessarily take that bath. But what we could do, we could change locations, sometimes just moving physically into a different room, or even better if we can step outside. Again, always the foundation is always, ensuring the safety of our children first, depending on their age and abilities. But if we can step outside for a moment, if we can, sometimes feeling the pressure of our feet on the ground or our hands on the wall, running our hand under water, there's endless ways we can imagery. We can imagine a place that helps us feel calm. We can hum. For some of us, it's the auditory. We may not be able to put on our favorite record at that moment, but we could hum a few bars. So whatever helps us in that moment to be with our emotions. And then C is for calm our thoughts. Once we have used our breath to help us stay regulated, then we hopefully have access then in that moment to our thinking brain if we're regulated enough. And, sometimes that breath is 1, sometimes it's 10, sometimes it's 20 minutes of, going into another room and doing some breath work, or again, whatever helps us calm in the moment. But once we've reached the point where we're able to reconnect with our thinking brain, we can consider our thoughts. And often it's our nature, it's our instinct to have negative thoughts. Again, it goes back to the days of our ancestors. We're having an instinct to think the worst kept us alive. We saw that stick, we assumed it was a snake. We saw that tan rock, we assumed it was a tiger. That kept us alive, and we still have the same brain today. And so it's our instinct to think the worst. And so we can acknowledge our thoughts. Maybe we're thinking, my kid is mean. Maybe we're thinking, I'm a bad parent because I lost it. Maybe we're thinking the worst case scenario will be the outcome. Maybe we're thinking there's something wrong with our kid. Maybe we're thinking there's something wrong with us. But we can just kind of become curious about, all right, where are my thoughts right now? And if we're having a negative thought, then we can start by, again, compassion and acceptance. Okay, makes sense that I'm having a negative thought. I know my biology, I know my brain. Okay, what is a more calming thought? And so an example of a more calming thought, if I'm worried my kid is mean, we could instead think, okay, my kid is experiencing big emotions right now and doesn't yet have the brain development or life skills to respond in more effective ways. Or if we're thinking that I'm a bad parent because I lost it, we can instead think, actually, getting it wrong is how I get on the path towards learning what I need to so that I can get it right in the future. And so I can view this with a growth mindset. And that is a more calming thought. Or if we're having a thought that it's the worst case scenario, we can consider that everything's actually going to be okay.
Mm-hmm.
no matter what's going on, it's okay. Everything
Yeah.
is figure outable. Who is it that says this?
Marie Forleo.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
everything is figure outable.
Yeah. Totally. I love that. So one of the places that I always go is, so I'm very future focused. So I'm always like 20 years down the road. Like I'm always in your seat with your kids being grown. And I'm like, where are they? What are they doing? Are they thriving? Are they, able to calm themselves? Are they, I don't want to say happy because that's, we all know that that's kind of a myth, whatever. But, are they doing good? And are they like confident in themselves? And are they going after what they want? Like, so I always flash forward like 10, 15, 20 years. And I catch myself doing it in these tiny moments that have nothing to do with 10 years from now. They're just, but a lot of the times it's my recurring thought, like even with something as silly as like a sibling conflict or, whatever. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I was actually so triggered because I'm thinking like, oh, they're not going to be friends when they're 20 and 22. And I'm just, so it's like, I go really, really far in the future. So what advice do you have for that? I mean, the ABC technique is amazing. And then how do we like stay grounded in present moment where our 2 feet are? I mean, maybe you could attest to just how fast the whole journey goes from when they're 0 to 18, but like what else?
Well, let's personalize, because this is the work that I do with parents when we work one-on-one, is we take these very general strategies and they make them more personal. So let's personalize that ABC strategy for you.
Mm-hmm.
When we think of awareness, one of the ways that we can get better at noticing when we're going to lose it is by tuning in with how we feel our emotions in our body. So for some of us, we feel them in a clenched stomach or a tight chest or a headache or a tightness in our throat. Or do you have any awareness, do you think, around where you feel emotions in your body?
Totally. I think one of the first and easiest to find is in my solar plexus. So I have almost this like, it feels like kind of a fire. It feels like this, like, this fire burning.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So that's huge that you have that awareness. For many of us who don't yet have that awareness, we can work to build it by taking mini moments of awareness throughout the day. That moment when we're in the car waiting for our child, or when maybe we've been looking at the screen for too long and we need to look up and take a break. We can tune in with our body. We can notice how we're feeling. And also when we lost it and we're having our first moment to think, maybe we wake up in the middle of the night, maybe it's when our head hit the pillow and we realize, oh, okay. And we can again become reflective, like, I wonder, where was I feeling that in my body? And just again, when we just even start thinking about this, we're just going to build our awareness. You'll work towards the point where you're feeling triggered and you'll be like, oh, okay, where do I feel this in my body? So it's a process. This is life work. This isn't something we do in a day. You have that awareness that when you feel it in your solar plexus, that feeling of a fire, that's okay. I'm feeling triggered. And so for you, what's in the moment tool that you can use when to help you be with your emotions, to be with them. Like, I can feel angry and I'm okay. What is something in your body? Because it always starts with our body. We have to start by calming our body before we have the capacity to calm our mind. So what helps your body feel calm?
The 2 things that you mentioned that resonate with me the most are definitely breath and then stepping outside, going into nature, even like barefoot on the ground.
Okay. So next time you're having that thought that your kids are going to grow up and be in jail.
Right, exactly.
Like we all do. And I can laugh because I get it. I've been there. And so, all of us moms get it. So, so next time you're having that catastrophizing thought, we'll call it, what is the plan? What combination of those things, or what one of those things will you do?
First, I'll notice and then take some deep breaths, like the 4 in, 8 out, something like that.
Or it can be, depending on our breath capacity, we can start with 4 in, 6 out. But the idea being that our out breath is longer than our in breath, because that helps to calm our body and our mind. Okay. And then you're going to tune in with your thought. And what thought do you anticipate having based on thoughts that you've had in the past?
Maybe, what if I don't have a good relationship with my kids? Or what if they don't like me when they're older? Or what if we don't get along? Or what if they don't get along? Something along the lines of those. I mean, there's many variations, but that's a
rooted in relationship. I'm here. Would you say that's accurate?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So what would be a more calming thought around relationship for you?
We're here now. We're together. We're building the foundation for our relationship in the future. They have their own journey. You know, they're sovereign beings apart from me. That's a lot. That's a lot of thoughts, but
that's how we start. We start by brainstorming, and this will continue to evolve for you. And there'll be times when certain thoughts work better than others. But let's just pick one so that we have a plan for next time. One that feels like it would maybe generally work for a variety of thoughts.
So I like, we are here now.
So next time you feel that fire in your solar plexus, you're going to take those deep breaths. You're going to consider whether 1, 10, or 20 minutes is what you need in that particular moment. And then once your body is calm enough that you have the capacity to tune in with your thoughts, you're going to become curious about what your thought is. You're going to acknowledge it with compassion. It makes sense. I'm having this thought. And because it's always about the and I can have a different thought. And the different thought that I'm going to have is, we are here.
I love it.
So next time you have that catastrophizing thought, give this a try. And, and we know that our breath, or whatever our calming strategy is, whatever our B stands for, the more we can do that in a calm time, the more helpful it is in calming us in a activated time, because sort of comes back to the same thinking that if we can associate, for example, that breath work with feeling safe, if we can carve out that even 5-10 minutes a day, 5-10 minutes once a week, whatever you can do. Again, we can only do our best, and that's good enough. Even if we can just do it once a week, maybe once a week, our partner can give us 10 minutes and we can do breath work for 10 minutes in a really safe space. Maybe it's our bedroom, maybe it's outside on the deck, wherever it is. And then what will happen is, again, we will create safety, feelings of safety around that breath work, just like our child will begin to create feelings of safety around uncomfortable emotions. And so over time, we become less reactive.
Brilliant. So that is so practical, because it's not like telling somebody who's triggered, like, calm down. It's not like when we're triggered, like we have to calm down by this new breathing strategy. Like, we can train our brains and our bodies in calm moments first. That's brilliant.
I mean, essentially what we're doing is self-regulation. The co-regulation is when our parent or our partner, I mean, we need co-regulation throughout a lifetime. It's not just for kids. It's like when we get home at the end of the day and we're acting as our worst selves, or maybe it's that we've been home all day and our partner arrives and we're acting as our best selves. I had plenty of those experiences. Or we're arriving home at the end of the day and acting as our worst selves. When our partner can recognize our behavior as dysregulation and not, I'm a bad person, or I'm a bad partner, or I'm a bad mom. When they can recognize our behavior as, we are experiencing emotions right now, and we are feeling triggered, and we are in a fight, flight, or freeze state, and so we're acting as our worst selves. And then they can respond by creating safety. They can respond by saying, how can I help? You look like you've had a tough day, as opposed to, getting angry. And it's not that it wouldn't make sense. I mean, of course, again, it's our nature if
Yeah.
somebody treats us badly, to feel angry and set limits. So it's all like everything in life, this really complicated mix. But I think the most elevated thing that you can do as a parent, and the most elevated thing you can do in any relationship, is to recognize somebody's misbehavior as dysregulation, and instead of getting reactive in response and escalating the storm, instead respond with co-regulation. It's, I think, the most beautiful thing we can do. And the hardest.
Yeah, lots of practice.
Especially from my personal experience, it's a lot easier to do with my kids than with my husband.
I would agree with that. Yeah, for sure. And this work is helpful in all relationships too.
Exactly.
So it will, eventually spill over with your partner and your friends and all of that. But yeah, it is. I mean, because I think it's easy for us to have compassion for our kids. It's easier for me to have compassion for my kids than it is for myself.
True.
Oh, you bumped your head and I'm sitting here thinking like, oh, I could have been a little bit calmer. It's like, yeah, I think we need to give ourselves a little bit of grace. This is the hardest job I've ever had in my life. And I think so many parenting, that is. And I think so many of us really resonate with that statement. So yeah, we're trying the best we can, doing the best we can with what we have. So I'd love to know, as we start to wrap up, what's one thing that you wish people would ask you more about?
I guess what I think of when you say that is, I think that most parents, when they come to me, are looking for, they're focused on what their child needs to do differently. They're focused on, the child's behavior. And I think that as parents, one of the hardest things is to understand that it starts with us, and it starts with our own regulation. And so if we're struggling with a dysregulated kid, we can start by looking at ourselves and becoming curious about what we can do to support our own regulation, both in terms of, again, setting up an environment that supports our needs, utilizing in the moment tools, and becoming, reflective on if we're losing it on a regular basis and it doesn't necessarily make sense, like, what might be going on there, and doing some reflective work there. That's really step one.
Right. I think so often we're looking at all the external things, like the people in our lives, the circumstances of our lives, and instead of pointing the finger within, it's not easy to go within. It's not easy to, say that we had something hard in childhood happen, or that we can't cope with our own feelings, let alone cope with our children's feelings. So I think that's a beautiful point, is that we can take a compassionate look within first. I love that. So now I'm going to ask you the 3 questions I ask everybody at the end of the interview. And the first one is, what's bringing you joy today?
What's bringing me joy today is being home, because we've actually just recently returned from traveling for 2 weeks. It was a really once in a life opportunity for me and my extended family to do a national parks tour
Cool.
in Arizona and Utah and California. And it was just an amazing experience. But being home after being away and traveling for 2 weeks, it's like the most beautiful thing.
Mm-hmm. Perspective, right? Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
And then what, if anything, are you reading now? I know you mentioned a book earlier, but is there anything else?
Yeah, my educational book is Brain Body Parenting by Mona Delahook, but I am anxiously counting down the days. I think in about a week or so, Ruth Ware is going to release her summer book called 0 Days, and that's a psychological thriller for anyone who doesn't know Ruth Ware, and that is my favorite go-to summertime read.
Awesome. And then who or what have you learned the most from?
I've learned the most through my relationships with my children, through my relationships with my partner, through my relationships with my family, because I believe it's through our relationships that we come into conflict. If we could live alone, we would never be challenged. And it's in being challenged that we need to really push ourselves to grow. I think in particular, our relationship with our children, because we love our children so much that we are willing to do that hard thing. And it is really hard work to grow. But I think of parenting as it's not Parenting is not about perfection, but I do believe it's about growing into our best selves as we hold our child's hand as they grow into their best selves.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for the work you're doing. It's so important. Thank you for supporting all the parents and in turn supporting all the kids. I know it's going to make such a difference, and I'm sure that it already is. So thanks so much for showing up in the world the way you do.
Thank you so much for the work that you do as well. And I do want to share with any listeners who would be interested in getting a copy of my cheat sheet for how to stay calm in the moment. They can visit my website at laurareardoncoaching.com and download a free copy right there.
Amazing. We're going to do that right now, and I'll put it in the show notes so you can just hit the link below. So it'll be nice and easy. Thank you so much for that.